Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for this short video today. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the procedure of getting a file out from Inventor across into 3ds Max. I'm going to be using 2022 release. Just really to share how accessible now Max and the Arnold renderer namely is to get a really nice quality render out in a very short period of time. So without any further ado, I'm just going to share my screen. And talk you through it. So, as I say, I'm using Max 2022. I've got a fairly simple model inside of Inventor. For the purpose of this, I'm just going to do a very quick mirror just to take the cordless drill that I've got here and make sure that I've actually got a whole drill that I can render up. So let's just mirror those features and save that out inside of Inventor. So Inventor 2022, going to save this IAM Inventor assembly, jump across into Max, choose File, choose Import, and literally browse to and find that exact same IAM file and press Open. This same workflow would work from SolidWorks, from CATIA, from SketchUp, from Fusion, pretty much any other 3D CAD application out there. Inventor specifically, I'm going to import as body objects. It works with the Inventor data really well. Leave pretty much all of this by default. If you've got a really complex model, change to meshes and lower the mesh resolution. If you really want to have refined edges, then do the opposite, move it upwards to the right. I'm going to leave everything as default, hit OK. Let Max open it. It's going to be a little bit slower today because I'm just running off battery for the purpose of this short video. So it's going to be a little bit slower to produce the render and do some active shade. But the geometry will come in. It will do an okay job of the materials, to be honest. It's not going to give perfect materials and certainly won't give any Arnold supported materials. But we'll talk you through that process because it is relatively straightforward nowadays and really accessible for even a new user. And the first thing I'm going to do once this is opened up is just create a photo studio scene. I'm going to do the whole thing from scratch to show you how easy and straightforward it is. A lot of people will import this into a pre-made scene, but I'm just going to do everything from scratch here. So perspective view, Alt and Enter to go into a full screen. I'm just going to go to F to go into a front view, select my object, press A for angle snap, and then select and rotate to rotate this round by 90 degrees so that it's vertical. And then maybe use this axis here to get it facing the camera. And then what I'll also do is just eyeball this very roughly, just so it's kind of in the middle. If you want to be more precise, you have got to type in at the bottom here, so we can come in and be a bit more precise if you want to be. But for the purpose of this, roughly centered. Once we've got that, I'm going to select the drill and group, ungroup, as many times as it will let me. By default, every assembly and sub-assembly in Max will be grouped together. I want the individual components, so I'm just going to go down to component level and delete this rogue one that I don't need for the purpose of this. From here, I'm going to go into a left-hand view, go to my Create panel, choose to create 2D, and create a line. I'm going to click once to the right of the product here or in front of the product, hold down Shift to turn on Ortho Snaps, and click again here and again here to create an L shape. I'm then going to go to my Modify panel, expand the line, choose Vertex, select this vertex at the back, scroll my Modify control panel over here, find Fillet, and just click, drag, and scroll to put a fillet on there. So I'm kind of creating a studio ramp. Whilst I'm there, I'm just going to minimize this front here as well, just to pull that down. And if you want to, it doesn't necessarily need to be that high either. Once we've got that, from my modifier list, I'm going to choose Extrude. Go into a perspective view once again. Make sure you don't deselect the line. If you do, press H on the keyboard or use your selection tree on the left-hand side to go and select that line. And with that extrude, just do it by eye. In this case, about 25 should be sufficient. So extrude 25 this way. And then I'm just going to use a mirror command again in here, just to mirror this around. We'll go around the Z and we'll create a copy. Once we've got that, I'm going to set my renderer, if it's not already set, to Arnold. So choose Render Setup. Then in the dialog box, I'm going to use active shade today rather than production rendering, so a little bit more modern, and I want to use Arnold. Whilst I'm in there, we could also up your render output if you want to, so I'm going to go up to 1920 by 1080 for the purpose of this. I'm going to press M to go into my material browser and just make this full screen. To keep this straightforward, I'm going to do a handful of materials. I'm not going to do anything overly complicated. But the key is we're using an Arnold renderer, so we want to use Arnold materials. On the left-hand side, go to General and drag and drop physical material into your scene. With that selected, I'm going to choose a preset matte paint. I'm going to change the color, and I want that color to be just off-white. So drag down to the bottom left corner to select a sort of a black color, and I'm going to move that down so it's just off-white. Okay. Make sure that is right down in the lower right hand side there, so you don't get it too red. Once you've got that, and you've got your color set, my mouse is having a little argument with me, so it's just not letting me select that very lower left hand side, which is a little bit frustrating. I'll get there in a second. There we go. So we want just off-white, a sort of grey white. That material, I'm going to click my ramp and assign. I then want to have a couple of materials for the drill. We're not going to go mad today. We're going to have a matte black or a glossy black plastic, a rubber, maybe a metal, and then a matte plastic as well. So just use the same physical material, drag and drop, double click it, choose a preset, make it rubber. If you want to, you can rename your materials in the top right hand side, should you want to. And then in your model, I'm just going to zoom in and select anything that I would like to be rubber. So these two parts of the grip just here, Control and R, spin around, hold Control and select these two parts of the grip and assign my rubber material. From there, this is easier on two screens, but I'll drag in another material. I'm going to select a glossy plastic. I'm going to come in and select a nice Man Machine orange, naturally. And I'm going to assign that to these two green components, just here. From there, I'm just going to copy this orange material, hold Shift and drag the material across. Double select it. I'm going to make a matte plastic this time and make it black. Hopefully we won't get the same issue we had last time. So a nice black plastic. We're going to assign that to this back part here. The rotation forward, backwards. And then we're also going to assign it here to the chucks. Also to the trigger. And finally to the battery. Whilst we're down here, let's have rubber and orange around here as necessary, just to match what it came out with from Inventor. Now I could have come in and selected the materials that came across from Inventor and tweaked them if I wanted to, but generally speaking, I find it so much easier to come in and make these mods on the fly. We can very quickly create these materials nowadays inside of Max for use with Arnold. It's not particularly difficult to go through this process anymore. So finally, let's maybe create a metal for the front of the drill. So let's come and drag that across. And again, we're going to choose a finish preset, come down to metal, and I'm just going to choose a matte aluminium for this. Not necessarily a realistic material, but nonetheless, it will give something with a bit of texture, and add that to the front of my drill. T for top, create, lights, choose Arnold lights, and from there we're going to choose to create an Arnold light from the left, pointing to the right hand side. With that, if you want to, make sure it's pointing straight. We don't really want it at too much of an angle, so with the light selected, we can grab either by eyeballing it or by typing in its position in the X and the Y. We want it relatively close to our product, but not too close. And we don't want this targeted. So with the light selected here, we can turn off targeted. Go into a front view, select that same light and bring it up so it's kind of in the middle of our product, facing it, like so, maybe a little bit higher. And then using our perspective view, you can see the light's quite big at the moment, so we want to reduce the size down. So with it selected, scroll down, we can see that we're emitting from a quad, so it's emitting from a polygon. We can change that if we wanted a spotlight or a circular light, for example, or a cylinder. A quad's fine, but I want this much smaller. So I'm going to lower this to maybe 12 and then put that by 24. Move that up a little bit. It's still a little bit big, so maybe we'll go 12 by 12 square. And again, we're just going to eyeball this for the purpose of this and get it roughly in the center of the product using my front, left and top views. Once that's done, I'm going to leave everything on that light as it is. I'm going to select it, use my rotate tool with my angle snaps, holding down shift, drag around 180 degrees to create a copy. If you want to make it easier, we can create an instance, which means these components will stay linked, because I will probably need to tweak and adjust these settings as we move forwards. I've just placed that in the exact same offset to the right, so 10 in the X minus 10 in the X. Finally, let's rotate around into a vertical position. Again, creating an instance and setting the relevant movements so that we've got 0 and 0. Go into the front view and just play with the height so it's a little bit above the product. Finally, from our top view, create a camera. You could use a physical one. I'm just going to use a target camera for this, slightly off center, pointing at the product. I'm then going to use a left view and bring the camera up ever so slightly. And in that same view, I'm going to also move the target up slightly to the center of the product. Hold Alt, press W, choose the bottom right viewport, and then press C for camera. You're now seeing what your camera can see. We can then use the different views to move and dolly the camera upwards, downwards, forwards and backwards to make that view look exactly as we want it to look. From here, that looks great. I just want to rotate the object a bit more. So much like you would in reality, I'm going to select that object to move it. In here, I should have grouped this all first, but I'm just going to use my browser on the right just to come in and select all of my objects. I'm just holding down Control whilst I'm clicking them. Once we have everything selected in the scene, to make my life easier, I am going to group it now that it's all got materials on. And I'm just going to rotate it using this axis. So it's like that. Go full screen. And from there, I now want to see what this looks like. So let's change my camera to use active shade. This is either going to be too bright or too dark to begin with. And actually at the moment, there's another material that I haven't pinpointed in there. So this is just giving me a warning that on this drill somewhere is a material that Arnold doesn't like. So let's just clear and close that. The render's looking pretty good already. But let's just turn off active shade and try and find that particular component that we didn't have assigned to the right material. So Chuck, we assigned that one. So let's just start hiding some things. So we assigned him. We definitely assigned him. There it is. It's that one there. So these center planes that we had here inside of Inventor, they've just come across in Max and they just haven't been assigned a material yet. So if I unhide all, with those now deleted, if I turn on active shade again, we don't get that error because there's no longer any materials that aren't supported by Arnold. And actually already we're getting something that's pretty reasonable, to be honest, for a couple of minutes work. All I'm going to do there is just turn off active shade. It's a little bit slower again with the battery. I should have plugged it in really, that was my bad, so sorry for that. We're just going to tweak the exposure control ever so slightly and then go and play with a couple of settings on the lights just to get them to give us a slightly different quality output more than anything else. So let's turn off active shade. That'll just take a couple of seconds to disable. And then what we're going to do is press 8 on the keyboard. And once we've pressed 8 on the keyboard, it will take us into our environment options. And inside those environment options, we can play around with our exposure control, change different methods of controlling that exposure control to make the entire scene a little bit lighter, make the entire scene a little bit darker, and it will control things for us. So using number 8, I'm just going to turn on physical camera exposure control, hit render preview, and what this will do is it will give me a preview of what my scene's going to look like. It's instantly made the whole thing brighter. I'm then going to use this exposure control to higher or lower as necessary on your scene. The grey here is going to make everything quite dark. The lighter the materials you have in the scene, the brighter it will be. But I'm just going to play around with that exposure control and just check out that preview to get something that I'm happy with. And actually around 7 doesn't look too bad. 7.5 maybe a bit better. 8 might be too dark, so let's stick with 7.5. From there, I'm just going to go into my perspective view so I can zoom out without affecting my lights or without affecting my camera. I'm going to select one of the lights and just scroll down. I don't need to change the intensity on these at all, but what I do want to do is put the number of samples up, which will heighten the quality of those lights within my render. Now, although I've changed one light because I copied them as instances earlier, all 3 lights have updated. So I can now press C for camera, go ahead and turn on full active shade to go ahead and render this scene in full screen mode, for example. This is still a live render, so I could go and tweak the camera in my scene. It's active shade, it would update. But actually for what is realistically a handful of minutes work if you weren't explaining things as you go, I've imported a model from Inventor. I've assigned an Arnold material. I've created a simple ramp, Photo Studio ramp, and then the key is 2 things. I've assigned Arnold materials, just using some presets, and I've assigned some Arnold lights. Now these materials don't have any textures to them. If you had a material that had a texture like a brushed metal or a leather or a carbon fiber or something like that actually had a texture linked to it, we would need to add some mapping controls inside of 3ds Max like UVW map or unwrap or something like that, so that it knew how to wrap your textures around your curved surface. I'll save that for another video, but for the purpose of this, to get started with some simple renders and actually get what is a pretty nice result within minutes, to get this kind of result in earlier releases of 3ds Max would be a considerable amount of work and pain. Whereas now, for those product design manufacturing collections out there, to get an Inventor model in and get actually a pretty nice render out is quite fast. And by the way, that scene, save the scene, import a new model, render it. If the model is too big, scale it down, render it. It doesn't matter, the output quality will be the same. You might have to tweak the lights dependent on the actual component and the shadowing. But typically speaking, from Inventor into Max, I know the rendered output hasn't quite finished yet, but I'll leave it rendering after the video and upload the output. But yeah, generally speaking, pretty good. Thank you for your time. I hope that's been useful, and we will catch you again soon. Take care. Goodbye.